Rain. It had only been a few hours of walking before it started, and it hasn't stopped yet, 3 hours later. It was like the Pegasi up above were purposely trying to ruin my day by making the storm only follow us. I knew it wasn't true, seeing as the wasteland we tracked through looked like it had been turned into a muddy slop quite some time ago. It wasn't even the cold rain itself that irritated me. It was the mud. It was kind of alright, seeing as I had gone numb 20 minutes or so ago. But it just made it that much harder to make sure I had a good hoofing when going up or down hills. We had all been relatively quiet the whole time, and I could feel in my gut that Brass would just ask another dumb question soon. "Hey, Backlash!" Brass yelled from just behind me. The one good thing about the mud was that I could hear him squish up behind me, so no more startling. Unfortunately, as I turned to look at him, I lost track of where I was stepping and had my hooves slip right out from under me. I let out a sigh as I slid a few feet down the hill we were heading from. I got to my hooves and slicked the mud from my muzzle and looked back up, watching as Gale carefully made his way down after us. "What is it, Brass?" I grunted as I did my best not to slide any further. "How exactly are you planning on finding things to sell?" He pointed out rather blatantly. "Yeah, I have to take what I thought back." That's not a dumb question at all. The real answer was, I don't really know. "Do you have some MOM facility around here that you spotted but could never get into before and might be able to open now?" I wish that I could just say I did. I sighed and looked a few ginger steps up towards the hill, finding that as I went down, the dirt cooperated a bit more with each step. I have a few ideas, and there are quite a few structures around here hidden amongst the hills. Those might have something good still. I knew that on our repeated trips through here, Skynet had cleaned out most of the valuables among the trail. I was mostly just trying to keep him calm and relaxed. "How do you even know we're going the right direction?" Gale spoke up as he made it to the bottom of the hill, standing with Brass and I. "All these hills look the same to me." "Well, my sister and I have traveled this trail many times when trading, so I know where everything is supposed to be along here," I stated rather matter-of-factly. "Plus, I've got my Pitbuck map." I shook my left hoof, the bright pink shell of it barely visible under the thick layer of mud around it. "But if you've been through here many times, how isn't it that you've never scavenged?" Gale scrunched up his muzzle in thought, and rubbed his muddy hoof on his chin before realizing it was slathered onto him. I looked down to Brass as I continued, giving the young ghoul a nervous smile. "As a trader, I thought you'd have picked these places clean." Brass deadpanned and rolled his eyes, trotting past me through the next hill. "Come on, Backlash. At the very least, I want to get out of the rain." Gale followed and gave a nervous smile of his own. I frowned as I couldn't help but feel that I was getting us in over our heads again. "There's an old rest stop a quarter mile from here," I mentioned as I quickly trotted after Brass, catching up to the two momentarily. "We can take a break there, see if the weather will let up." From falling into the mud to standing still, my body was reminding me that it was cold. The near freezing rain was just going to take its toll on all of us if we didn't dry off. "And I'll see about building us a fire." I was surprised I had never thought about it before, but the maintenance closet on the rest top had quite a few rolls of paper towels still wrapped up in wax paper. Not only did it make for a good starter fuel for fire, we each split one and used it to get ourselves dried off a bit. The rain hadn't died down one bit by the early afternoon, and I was beginning to get worried that if it didn't let up, we would be stuck here overnight. Brass lifted a bottle over to me, and the three of us sat under the covered rest stop. I hoped that he couldn't read on my face that I was worried. I took it with a smile and guzzled it down, once again not even taking time to enjoy it. I looked over to Gale, who had curled himself up next to the fire and appeared to have fallen asleep. I pulled myself to my hooves, wincing as my rear legs cried out for me to be done using them today. I walked over to the edge of the roof, putting my head under the constant stream of water that flowed from it. I bit down on the bottle and twisted it, squishing the container into the mud, before looking back to Brass, who was adjusting our dry clothes with his still weakened magic. "I'm going to take a walk alone. Clear my head a bit." I smiled softly to him, hoping that he would just stay here for now. He forced a smile and nodded softly. "Thanks. I'll promise I'll figure this all out." His smile dropped off as I spoke. Why? Why do you need to be alone to do this? That's the best Skyline impression I've heard in a long time. I sighed softly, letting him to smirk, again at least. I'm not trying to do this alone at all. In fact, I need you for this, Brass. I need you to make sure I keep a level head. One slip up, one wrong move is all it takes, and then 42 wins. I know. That's why I'm just extra worried. He huffed and scraped his hoof along the concrete. What if after we tell the elders what Sherbert's really up to, we just run? He looked up with me with a flicker of hope. She couldn't deal with the whole of the Rangers coming down on her. She'd have to give up. You think we can run? I laughed half-heartedly, hoping that he was really joking. You realize we can't, right? He shrugged and looked genuinely hurt that I didn't think we could. Why not? You have the files 42 needs. He raised his voice loud enough that Gale was stirred awake. If we take the Marauder, she would kill every pony she could to find until I returned. I screamed out at him, turning around. The cold rain stung on my bare flank, sucking what little heat I had absorbed from the fire right back out. Don't you see? She's not going to stop unless I find a way that she can never use that pond. Whoa, what's all this about? Gale groggily spoke as he rubbed his eyes and sat up. Who's killing who now? I turned and trotted angrily out in the rain. Why couldn't you understand? 42 was so much of a stereotypical villain that she's predictable. I mean, not so much in keeping track of her, but with how she'd been running everything. The most annoying thing is, when she shows up when I least expect her to, and have only made it out due to pure luck. Like my rib plate catching that bullet, my acidic blood, or how Harmony... I stumbled at the thought of her, nearly falling into my face on the mud. Just the idea that Brass wanted to run when she gave her life to help us. She would have died for nothing if we gave up now. Not only her, but the ponies of Winey and Ponyville as well. I mean, what about Pallet? If we stop now, The muscles on my neck started to ache, badly enough to knock me out of my thoughts. The hell? What now? I reached up and rubbed my neck with a muddy hoof, tilting my head down until it felt slightly better. My ears perked up at an odd sound carried over the sound of the downpour. There were voices, what sounded like at least two separate ones coming from just over the hill in front of me. I did my best to climb the muddy incline, keeping myself low as I crested the top. It was a pony talking with a sprite bot, their voices still muffled by the rain, but clear enough that I could hear the voice was Watchers in the bot. I got to my hooves with a smile, wanting to talk to him and trotting down without thinking. Once again, my hoofing failed me, as I was off on a cold slide down the hill. I slid into the rock at the bottom with a grunt, my muzzle completely entombed in a muddy pile. I sat up and brushed the mud off my face as well as I could, squinting as the rain did its best to push into my eyes. I looked over the pony talking to him, making out that he was a bright purple unicorn, similar to the color of Longbow, but he had a bright pink mane that made him stick out from the dark colors of browns and grays today. I pulled myself up and began to trot towards him. Hey, Watcher! I yelled out, making the purple stallion scream out and jump in terror. I watched as he flopped down into the mud, remarking that he looked a lot like I did every time some pony snuck up on me. The bobbing sprite bot turned as I approached, drifting a few feet towards me. Oh, hey Backlash. What are you doing out here? His voice cracked slightly through the speaker. The frightened stallion pulled himself up in the mud and looked me over cautiously. This is Notepad, by the way. He's been chronicling some of the events that have happened out west. That's great and all, but I need to know if you have the location of any pre-war supply caches in the area. I gave Watcher my best, pleading smile, still unsure of just how well he could see out of the sprite bots. Backlash. I can't do that. His voice came through the speaker heavily, stained with discomfort. I can't get involved with wasteland affairs. I'm sorry, but that's why I call myself Watcher. I let out a grunt, kicking at mud into frustration. You'd be content to just sit and watch a town full of innocent ponies collapse? Able to sit, knowing that mares and fools were forced into the wastes because you didn't want to help them? I prodded the bobbing sprite-bot with my hoof and glared at it. I knew that this was a very basic way to appeal to his sense of good, but to be honest, I'm desperate. You may find that acceptable from wherever high and mighty you sit, but from down here, you're just as bad as 42. The sound of the cold rain on the hills filled around us. No pony said anything for almost a minute, letting me look over the nervous stallion next to me more closely. The old barding he wore was in tatters, but it looked like the front half of it was an old Philadelphia SWAT barding. There was an old patch on the back of it. Instead of the common SWAT, it read, Writer. He had a single leather pouch slung across him, instead of a pair of saddlebags, which was an odd choice for somebody who was supposed to be chronicling things. And now that I thought about it, what the hell does that even mean? My thoughts were derailed by the sharp crack of static from the spite-bot, the normal upbeat waltz that spouted the air as the robot bobbed away from us. Great. Now I'm really screwed. I sat down in the mud and looked back at the other stallion. You wouldn't happen to know any pre-war complexes around here, where I could find anything worth trading, would you? I gave a weak, forced smile as my body tried to make me collapse then and there. He shook his head, starting to shiver along with me. I sighed and turned back towards the hill, calling back over my shoulder. We got a fire going at the rest stop over here. You can join us if you want. You know, get out of the rain for a bit. And that's very kind of you. He smiled and trotted over to me, nodding as he brushed his wet mane from his purple eyes. Was it Mr. Backlash that Watcher called you? We climbed the hills together, my bare flank feeling like it was being pricked with 1,000 little needles with every step. It's just Backlash. I huffed out while we reached the top. How do you know Watcher? If you know where he lives, I'd certainly love to go there and kick his lazy flank into gear. Actually, I've never met him outside the sprite bots. Notepad shrugged and concentrated at keeping his hoofing going down the hill. I made sure to do so as well. Twice was enough of falling into freezing cold mud today. I've just talked with him several times on my journeys. He's quite interested to hear the stories of the heroes that appeared around the wastelands. So you then what? Write about them? I asked, as my own curiosity was now piqued. Somebody who went around and wrote? How is that even a viable profession in these days, when every pony else was just barely getting by? Well, yes. Some pony needs to write these things down for future generations. He gave a smile as he gazed ahead of us, looking lost in his thoughts. You should have seen the things that some ponies have accomplished out east. It truly gives me hope that we will, one day, have a better world. I rolled my eyes at that. Yeah, sure. You can live in your fantasy world of sunshine and rainbows, but me? I'm pretty sure that we will never stop fighting ourselves. I stopped for a moment as the gears in my head fed me something odd. Wait. If you take down what's happening, why are you out here? Did you hear about 42? We were walking up to the rest stop, quickly ducking under the overhang of a roof to get out of the rain. I'm here because Watcher explained to me that there was an event like no other going on. An epic battle of good versus evil. It's going to be so fun to cover. He sounded genuinely excited, which made the gears in my head stop. I shoved him against the building as my blood felt like it was boiling. Fun? I slammed my hooves next to his head as he covered down. For the last month, ponies out here have been dying to what 42 has been doing. Backlash, what are you... Brass called out as he trotted around the corner, stopping dead in his tracks as he looked between the notepad and I. In my blind rage, I hadn't even felt the tip of the knife digging into my neck, as the cowering stallion's magic pressed it against me. I took a step back as his scared eyes wavered, his magic keeping the weapon on me. Please, Notepad stuttered, tears forming in his eyes. I don't want to hurt you. None of us are going to hurt you, Brass said softly, doing his best to keep calm. Just please, put the knife down. His talking was working, and I could feel the pressure of it come off me slightly. That's it. Nice and easy. We're all friends here. Notepad's magic wavered as he nodded to Brass. Thanks, Celestia. For a moment, a loud crash came from near the fire, startling both Notepad and I. It all happened so fast I wasn't sure anything was wrong at first, but then I smelled burning of my blood on the ground. I lost control of my legs as I felt dizzy, collapsing and falling to the ground while darkness clouded my vision. Funny that the cut across my throat didn't even hurt. In fact, I think it helped me feel warm again. The warm breeze that floated through the trees above me felt good in my coat. The wet ground I laid on wasn't the least bit cold or uncomfortable. In fact, it was the opposite. I wish I could just lay here forever. "Enjoying yourself?" Pinky asked from beside me. I opened my eyes and looked her over. Her mane still laid flat, like the last time we talked, but she had a smile on her muzzle, her eyes conveying both happiness and incredible fear. Why was she so afraid? Why had she been last time? So many questions that I could ask, but I simply nodded. "Listen, Backlash. I know I haven't been there for you when you've needed me." Her voice was deep with regret, her words nothing but the truth. "But I'd like to change that, even though it's going to get me in trouble." There was a rumbling across the horizon, making me sit up and glance over in the direction. A massive set of storm clouds were forming quickly, lightning arcing through them. "Remember these numbers. 5706. Pinky raised her voice to contend with the rumbles. I watched as the hilly lands swept back towards us, a large blast of wind hitting us as the clouds moved over. She grabbed my face with her hooves, making me stare into her eyes. "I'm sorry. It's been tough, but it's just going to get worse." She smiled again, her eyes softening softly. "You're tough, Backlash. Don't let her break you." A pulse of light came from the cloud. A bolt of lightning arced out of it and slammed in my chest, the force of it throwing me back into the tree and knocking me into the silent darkness once more. I came to again, feeling like I was drowning, forcing me to roll over and cop up what was probably close to a pint of blood. I gasped hard and heaved a few more times onto the concrete, sending what little was left of the beans from this morning out until, with a quite bit more blood. Opening my eyes, I looked about the fuzzy world around me, resolved into Blass, Gale, and Notepad, standing out in the rain looking at me. I looked down to find out why it felt like I had been bucked in the chest, only to find 2 spoons glued to my chest. Each spoon had a wire that ran to the exposed workings of the energy weapon that I had brought out of East Orchard. Brass smiled and bounced on his hooves as I looked over at him confused. A weapon dropping out of Notepad's levitation. "It worked!" He screamed and splashed in the mud happily. "What happened?" I asked, trying to sit up, but once again the world wanted me to stay down as it twirled around me. I flopped back down onto the warm concrete and groaned as my head throbbed in pain. "Well, from my understanding, me dropping the cook pot startled the new guy here, causing him to accidentally slit your throat," Gale said, raising his hoof to pat Brass on the head. "Your buddy here saved your life with his quick thinking, having Notepad apply a healing potion to your throat as he looked for things from your bags." He ruffled Brass's mane, making him glow bright in the embarrassment. "When I noticed your heart had stopped," Brass spoke up to draw my attention from his discomfort, "I managed to jerry-rig up a defibrillator, using a pair of Gale's spoons, his wonder glue, and some wiring from your bags." He beamed a proud smile to me, as I couldn't help but share it. He's one crafty stallion, I'll give him that. "Look, I'm really sorry about that." Notepad tried to apologize before I cut him off. "No, I shouldn't have snapped like that. I've just had a bad month is all." I sighed out and rolled myself onto my hooves. As I did, I couldn't help but notice that Notepad's hooves were wrapped in healing bandages. "I hope my mutation didn't cause you too much pain." "I've had worse." He forced a smile, lying to my face in his attempt to be courteous. "Now that you're all right, do you mind if we get out of the rain?" The moment he said it, I started to shiver. The Delge held no signs of letting up, as I looked up to the clouds, the storm from my dreams flashing in my mind. I nodded to them, and carefully pulled myself up, feeling as Notepad pulled the wires off. The spoons stuck to me. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad to be alive and all, but did they really have to wonder glue them to me? I painfully hoofed to the end of each one, biting hard before tearing it off, taking most of the coat under it with it. As I recovered from the pain of moving the spoons, I felt cold against my side, instinctively turning to look why. The entire right side of my body was coated in blood, slicking off of me and onto the concrete. That was the only clear portion left. I stood just staring at it, my mind refusing to process that I had technically just died again. No, not refusing to process. That was a completely wrong assessment. The thing is, it just didn't faze me at all. How is it that in a month's time, this had become my life? Was I really expected to complete this journey? The gears of my mind locked up at the overload of existential uncertainties, sending a sharp pain through my head. I shook it off and carefully made my way around the side of the rest stop, knowing to take it even slower as the browns and grays around me started to bleed into each other. After a few minutes of walking, I had made it to the fire, with just enough energy to flop down in front of it. "I hope you're hungry, Blacklash." Brass spoke out excitedly, while standing on a cinder block for some reason. "Gale was nice enough to lend me a few things, so I'm making us all pancake-battered cram and peas." He turned back around and grabbed at a spatula from his mouth, flipping whatever he had said was in the pan set over the fire. As I lay there, I took in the warmth of the fire that it gave, relaxing my body and making my eyelids feel like they weighed a ton each. As I closed my eyes and listened to the others making light conversation, I couldn't help but think how much I missed Skyline. Even if she was here right now, she'd be smacking me over the head with how I almost died again. I mean, she would, wouldn't she? Even with the events unfolding all around us, the only thing I seemed to do was screw things up. And with every time, why does every pony keep supporting me? Even Pinky broke the rules for me, as much as 5706 helps. I let out a yawn as I drifted off to sleep, my mind seeing fit that I didn't need any more dreams today, or nightmares. And just as suddenly as I'd fallen asleep, I was woken the next morning by a loud slam. My eyes shot open as I looked around, seeing that the ruckus was Gale tossing what remained of the maintenance closet's wooden shelves into the fire. The smallest amount of light was coming over the horizon, as my pip-buck told me it was 7:44 a.m., making me fight to remember exactly what time it was when I fell asleep. I really need to remember that, to put things for a clock in my vision. "Good morning. Feeling any better?" Gale asked with a smile. "We missed you at dinner last night, but Brass saved you some for when you woke up." He pointed his hoof next to me to where there was a pair of breaded cram slices left on a piece of old cardboard and a quarter of old can of pre-war peas. As all my senses returned to me, I noticed that it had finally ceased raining, which was good because we were way behind schedule. "Where's Brass?" I groggily spoke, rubbing my eyes with my hoof, rolling back on my hooves, my head reminding me that I had lost quite a lot of blood the day before, by making me lightheaded again. I managed to get myself upright, glancing down at the food as my stomach gurgled. "He and the other stallion went off to search for something radioactive for him. Last night he told us he felt weak and thought it might help." Gale shrugged and sat down in front of the fire, holding his hooves out as the new wood burned. That makes sense, seeing as it's been quite a while since he's had his suit to keep him strong. Not that he's needed the suit to be helpful, but I probably should have saved something radioactive just for this kind of occasion. But that's something a pony who is a lot smarter than me would have thought of. I leaned my neck down and sniffed at what Brass had left me. I would like to believe that it was because he could cook well, but not because I was starving. But it smelled like a slice of heaven to me. I couldn't help myself but dive into it, messily chewing at the delicious substance. I didn't even pause between finishing the breaded cram before taking the can of peas in my hooves and shoving it against my muzzle. As I greedily slurped them up, I caught a glimpse of Gale staring at me, his eyes fixated on me with a worried gaze. I lowered the now empty can slowly away from my messy muzzle, giving him a small smile. "Well, that was a bust." I could hear Notepad say to him as Brass and him trotted towards us from the direction I had originally found him yesterday. I let out a belch and pulled myself to my hooves, stopping again as I felt lightheaded again. I really was hoping that this wouldn't become an issue today. I walked over to the mayor's room, hoofing it open and walking in. Overnight, Zin's outfit had been completely dried, which was a relief to me. If I had walked in that much rain before the day I died for real, it'd be too soon. The door opened behind me as Brass trotted in. I smiled brightly as I saw him, unable to hold back how proud of him I was, that he was my friend. And he beamed a wide smile back, using his magic to nudge his leather armor from the counter I had hung over it. He let out a giggle as I hoofed the leather trench coat on, making me do the same. I walked over and pulled him into a tight hug, feeling at his flesh squished a bit more than it had when he first became a ghoul. "Don't worry, buddy. We'll find you something radioactive soon," I said as I pat him on the head softly. "No friend of mine is going to need a sick day if I can help it." The gears in my head started up suddenly, trying to pull something out of my head that I was curious about recently. But what was it? He chuckled and stepped back, hoofing at his armor. "Yeah? Well, if you already used enough for the both of us." He slipped the oversized armor onto himself, the plating fitting nowhere near as well as yesterday. In fact, now that I looked at him, he visibly looked smaller. Was that because of the lack of radiation? Or just something that normally happens when you become a ghoul? Damn it. I swear this fit better yesterday. He slipped out of it and kicked it in frustration. Why couldn't I have just learned Mom's spell? The gears in my head were feeding me the question I had wanted to say. "Can you tell me about them?" I asked slowly, watching as he looked me over in confusion. "You never did tell me about your parents." He let out a sigh. "Well, I had never seen my father. Mother tells me that's because he was so good at repairing terminals, he was transferred to Las Pegasus chapter to help out on some project." He kicked at the armor again. "He must still be working on it, seeing as he never contacted Manhattan HQ or Mom again." I turned around and hoofed the wide-brimmed hat onto my head, listening as he continued. "As for Mother, she was so scared she'd lose me, she never wanted me to leave the base. Even working in artifact cataloging was too dangerous for me to be around, even when that was her job." He rolled his eyes and sat down hard, sorrow filling his words. "So when I told her I was going to the ministry, she flipped out and told me that if I went down there, she would disown me." He flopped on the floor, doing his best to mimic his mother's voice, as pain built, tearing up as he turned his gaze over to me. "I sure showed her, didn't I?" I took a page out of Skyline's book and decided to walk up and smack him. "That's fucking right you did! You went out into the wasteland and you survived!" He covered his head as he looked up to me, his eyes still reflecting on the pain he had felt. "You left the base and you've done incredible things. Saving my life on more than one occasion is one of the things that I'm personally proud you've done." I prodded at him as he wiped his cheeks. "So when we get back to Manhattan, you're going to walk straight up to her and tell her how wrong she was. You tell her about how you become a big damn hero out here in the real world." "Thanks, Backlash." He sniffled, getting to his hooves. "You're right. I don't want to be afraid of disappointing her anymore. But you know, even if she is my mom..." He dropped his gaze to the floor as sadness crept into his voice again. "What if she does disown me? She's the only family I've got." I smacked him across the head a second time, bringing a wave of anger washing over his face as he looked up to me. I smiled as he glared. "You're part of my fucking family too. Don't you forget that."